1 Thessalonians chapter 3. Look at verse number 1, if you would. We're in 1 Thessalonians on these Sunday mornings. Wherefore, when we could no longer forbear, we thought it good to be left at Athens alone, and sent Timotheus, our brother and minister of God, and our fellow laborer in the gospel of Christ, to establish you and to comfort you concerning your faith, that no man should be moved by these afflictions. For yourselves know that we are appointed thereunto. For verily, when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation, even as it came to pass, and ye know. For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain. Just because there is a chapter break in the Scripture doesn't mean that there is a break in the subject. Many times the chapter continues the previous chapter, and it has led some to even wonder if all of the chapter breaks are appropriate. We know that the chapter and verse divisions are not inspired, as in they were not in the original Hebrew word, in the original Greek. They came much later. But I don't believe that the Holy Spirit would allow a chapter break or a verse division that's inappropriate or wrong in any particular way. And so I believe that they are exactly where they ought to be. And that being said, chapter 3 is just a continuation of the same thought as chapter 2. You get a hint to that to the first word in verse 1, wherefore. Wherefore is a connector. It's tying you back to, because of that, now this. And so it's telling you we have not changed subjects. Well, what is the subject? Well, the subject in chapter 2 is Paul's affection for the church and his concern for their spiritual health. We saw in chapter 2 how that he first commended himself to them, defended his ministry. Then he commended them to himself. He bragged on them when I was there. He talked about how they received the word, not as the word of men, but as it is in truth, the word of God. He talks about how you followed spiritual examples, and even when you suffered, you stood fast. So he's commending that church for their spiritual health, even in the face of persecution. He's expressed more than one time how that he longs to see them. His desire is to get back to them eventually so he can strengthen them in the faith. When you read chapter 3, he's still saying the same thing. I still want to come see you. I'm still concerned about you. I'm still praying for you. I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to get you there. But if you back up to chapter 2 and verse 18, the very last statement, here is the linchpin of it all. But Satan hindered us. He says in verse 18 that we would have come to you again, I, Paul, once again, but Satan hindered us. So everything that he wanted to do was stymied by that hindrance. His forbearance, his sending Timothy to them because he couldn't go. All of that is because Satan hindered us. And so the thoughts and the emotions of Paul in chapter 3, you really see this pastor's heart comes out. It flows out of that. I wanted to do something. I wanted to do something good. I wanted to do something for you. But Satan hindered us. I thought about how much of our work and ministry and serving God is often hindered by Satan. We know that there is an unseen hand of God in providence working behind the scenes. But there's also another hand working behind the scenes. I believe with all of my might that Satan is active behind the scenes, and he's disrupting, and he's deceiving, and he's destroying. That's why he's called an angel of light. If the devil walked into our church this morning physically, he would not come in a red suit and horns and a pitchfork and a long tail. That's not him. He would come up dressed just like you. He is an angel of light. He comes in the midst undetected, and he would like to stay there. He would like for you to not even know that he's here. I'm always careful not to give the devil more credit than he deserves. But I wonder how much ministry over the years has been hindered by Satan. Brother Richburg, I believe that there are churches that have died, broken up, that are no more And it was the handiwork of Satan. I believe that there are preachers that were doing a good work, but they have fallen to the temptation that Satan laid before them, and they are no longer in the ministry. You know, Satan can influence government leaders to tyranny or to oppose churches and Christianity. I think that we have seen that very thing in our nation this year. And the truth is that Satan is still at work, and he's still trying to hinder the work of the gospel. This week is our mission conference, and I am amazed when I come to a passage like this and I think, Lord, I need to preach something missions to get our minds geared toward it. No, I'll just preach the passage, and I'm amazed at how relevant it is to what is getting ready to happen in our church. There's a lot of missionaries, and we've said this before, there are a lot of missionaries around the world this year that have been hindered in their work because of COVID-19. Now, that doesn't mean that COVID-19 is the work of the devil. Personally, maybe it was, but that doesn't mean that the devil invented the coronavirus. But I think he sure could use it as a tool to try to hinder somebody from doing the work of God. I mean, we've stood here and read the letters of missionaries that have talked about how we're hindered from meeting, or we can only have 20 in the place, or we're trying to do Zoom Bible studies, or whatever it might be. And there's a hindrance. There's a hindrance to the gospel. And by the way, that's not to even speak of normal hindrances. Culture shock is a hindrance to the gospel. Language barrier can be a hindrance to the ministry, and insufficient support can be a hindrance, and family opposition, all of that can be a hindrance. Satan will use anything at his disposal to try to stop the work of God. But here's what struck me about this passage. In chapter 2 and verse 18, he says, Satan hindered us. Here's what blessed my heart. There's a chapter 3. Because for most Christians, now listen to me, for most Christians, verse number 18 would have been the end. Nothing to write after this because they quit. Huh? I mean, Satan hindered me, and I quit, and I gave up, and I threw in the towel. Satan got into our marriage, and I walked out. And Satan sowed discord in our church, and I quit. And Satan, come on, help me. Satan made ministry hard, so I gave it up. Paul kept writing. Satan hath hindered us, but he didn't stop us. No, there is a chapter 3, there is a chapter 4, there is a chapter 5. We found a way to get to you, and the word continues on. I thought about faith promise, and faith promise is just a microcosm of the commitment of the whole Christian life. Here's what we call it: faith, promise, commitment. That's what we call it. Next Sunday, we'll all get cards. We've done this before. And you will write on that card how much that you will give to missions next year every week. This is above your tithe, above anything else. I'm going to give this amount to missions. And we put that card in the plate and we count that up. Here's the word that we don't emphasize enough: commitment. Faith, promise, commitment. Now this year, boy, God bless, we exceeded that amount. I mean, God really, really blessed. And I'm not sure that every single member kept their commitment, but somebody did. Somebody gave some extra. Somebody designated something, and it all came up. So we're going to be challenged to make a new commitment next Sunday. And that's just a small part. That's just one little thing of the whole commitment of the Christian life. And the Christian life is lived by commitment. But the word commitment implies there's going to be something against it. There's going to be a hardship. There's going to be a hindrance in this coming year to the commitment that you make. What is perseverance if there is nothing to persevere against? It's not perseverance. It's when those difficulties and those distractions come. It's when we're tempted to take an easier path. That is when commitment comes in. Now, I read that phrase, Satan hath hindered us, so I thought, what are the hindrances? So I read it again. And it's interesting to me that Paul doesn't tell me what hindrances there are. Now, I promise you, the average missionary prayer letter, he will tell you the hindrances. But he doesn't tell us. It's almost as if it doesn't matter. It really does not matter. The focus is not on the hindrance. The focus is on the commitment. In fact, Paul takes 4 words to tell you about it, and he moves on. He says, Satan hath hindered us. Keeps moving. And it would probably do you and I well in our Christian walk if we'd learn to spend about 4 words. That's about all you need, about 4 words to tell you about the trouble that I'm in, and just move on. Move on. Satan hath hindered us. Let me show you something about this text in chapter 3. I want you to notice, first of all, the priority of ministry. Paul's concerned about this young church at Thessalonica, and that's the thing that is foremost in his mind. It is important to him that they be strengthened in the faith. It is important to him that they be encouraged by Timothy. It is important to him that they couldn't be stopped. That's why he says in verse number 1, wherefore when we could no longer forbear. Verse number 5, he says, when I could no longer forbear. Look at verse 10. Night and day praying exceedingly that we might see your face. I'm getting the idea it's important to him. In fact, it almost seems like it is the most important thing to him. This ministry that God has given him, it is a priority of his life. Now let me tell you something. If ministry, serving God in whatever capacity He has put you in, if ministry is going to be a priority, you must first of all have a proper perspective. And I think that a lot of Christians have the wrong perspective on life. How do you look at church? Where do you place church on your list of priorities? Oh, church is good. Church is okay. I can take it. I can leave it. I can live with it. I can live without it. That is your perspective. There are other people, I'll be here or die. I am fanatical about it. That's their perspective. Jacob preached here Wednesday night, did an excellent job. Jacob preached Wednesday night, and he preached about this radical thought, being a 24/7 Christian. Huh? Every Christian is in the ministry. You may not get your salary from that, but every Christian, and in order to do that, you may need to change your perspective of church. You may not have ministry. You may not have serving God high enough on the list. It was funny, but it was sad. So it was sad, so it wasn't funny. That I watched Wednesday night, and I won't call any names, and we're all here, and we're listening to the same thing. I watched a man on Wednesday night sitting right here in this auditorium listening to a young man pour his heart out, and during the entire sermon, never looked up from his phone one single time. Whatever was on his phone was more important. He was here, but he could just as soon be anywhere else. See, here's what people do. People look at their life like it is a big piece of pie. It's got all these slices. So, God, I'm going to give you one slice of my life. Well, these other slices are mine. And you know, but Faith Promise comes along and we harp on missions and harp on missions. All right, God, I'll give you a little bit bigger piece. But the rest of the pie is mine. But in reality, the right perspective is that Christianity is like a hub and everything else spokes out of that. Christianity first, church first, serving God first. You have to have a proper perspective. Now, when you have a proper perspective, then when hardships come, then you will make appropriate adjustments. Paul has this church on his heart, and the most important thing to him is to confirm them in the faith, his ministry with them, his perspective. His perspective is that spiritual health is critical. My ministry to them is all important, but there are hindrances. So I just had to make some adjustments. I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to give up on it. But whatever I have to do to adjust it, and I need to see how they're doing, and I've tried. I can't get there. So I'll send somebody else. I'll figure something out. I need to see how they're doing. I will pivot. I will find another way, and that other way was to send Timothy to check on them. That's not plan A, it's plan B. But when ministry, when serving God becomes important to you, you will do what you have to do to just get it done. The hindrances didn't stop the ministry. My druthers would be to be there. That's plan A. But when plan A doesn't work, then I'll find plan B. Huh? Can I illustrate it? A long time ago, I determined that I would honor God with my tithe. That's what I decided I'd do. That became a priority to me. I promise you, there have been some hindrances to that since that commitment. Yeah. But that's what I determined to do. That's the conviction. Now, there may come a time when I have to cut some stuff out, sell a kid, do something. But it is not an option to not tithe. Right? I give the faith promise. I plan to keep giving the faith promise. And I put that card in. That is a commitment to me. That's a commitment. My lien holder expects me to make a mortgage payment every single month. I mean, it does. Gulf Power expects me to send them a check every single month. I think God expects me to put my faith promise in every time. See, here's the thing. My perspective is that we must send missionaries to the field with the gospel, and I know that there will be hindrances, but I just have to adjust. It's not an option for me to not support missions. It may be an option not to have a gym membership. It may be an option not to buy the new boat. It may be an option not to go to Starbucks every morning. It may be an option to quit Diet Coke and Dr. Pepper, whatever. I don't know. But I may have to make some adjustments. I made a commitment. Come Sunday, I'll be in church. I'm not dead and jailed. So I'll just be there. I plan to be there. That's the commitment. I may have to make some adjustments. There will be hindrances. You understand? That there will be. But if your perspective is right, then you make appropriate adjustments to do what is right. Nearly every Christian in this room decided January 1st, I'm going to read my Bible every day. Read it all the way through. Huh? And for many, that was great until January 4th. Because life is busy. If you knew how early I got to get up and get in the morning and get to work, I understand. Hey, let me help you with something. If you have time for Facebook and Twitter, you got time for the Bible. If you get up in the morning and you spend an hour trying to see what everybody else said on Facebook and you don't care what God said, See, the problem, you need to go back to perspective. The perspective is wrong. And if you got your perspective right, you would make whatever adjustments you have to make to read your Bible. We've talked about the challenges that missionaries have to face even right now with the whole coronavirus thing that's going on. And the letters that we've been reading from our missionaries saying that we can't do what we were doing, but here's what we are doing. Huh? Kendall Lawman, we supported him for 25 years, I guess, in China, and they kicked him out of China. But he said, God called me to the Chinese. So he moved to Silicon Valley where there's 600,000 of them. Started a Chinese church. Because God called me to the Chinese. It's not where I'd like to be, but it's the adjustments that I have to make. Quitting is not on the list of options. We have Stenson's kids here somewhere they are. I don't know where you're at. Here's a Stenson's kid. So Keith Stenson will be here tonight, be preaching next Sunday night. So Keith Stenson, we were eating the other night, he's got a radio station, great ministry in Uganda. And Uganda came in and made some changes that you can't live by, some laws they can't live by. So they had to shut the radio ministry down. So they started an internet radio station. If God called you to the work, get to the work. Here's what we have to do. We have to get to the place where we quit giving God all of these stipulations and all of these conditions. Just get to work. My dad was telling me the story, and I'll get the story wrong. Well, there's a preacher in Montana. His name is Nathan Bemis. And Nathan Bemis was called to preach, went to Bible school, and he was working in the church, and he wanted to pastor. And so Nathan Bemis would go candidate a church looking for a pastor, and he'd go, and after he'd candidate, he would leave, and he'd pray, "No, Lord, if they give me that adult Sunday school class, I'll take that church." And they wouldn't call him. He'd go candidate somewhere else, and he'd leave and say, Lord, I could pass that. Lord, if you let this happen here, Lord, I'll pass. And they wouldn't call him. Now for 5 or 6 churches candidating, he's out working. He's out working one day, and he got hold of a power pole or electric cord and shocked him, threw him on his back. And him looking up in the sky, he said, "Lord, next church I'll take, no conditions. No conditions." So a church in Kalispell, Montana called him. He'd been there for 40 years pastoring that church. You're just going to get to the place where you throw all of your conditions, all of your stipulations out the window and just say, "I will get to the work." When ministry becomes a priority, I'm hurrying, you have to have a proper perspective. And if you have a proper perspective, you will make appropriate adjustments. And when you do, it builds up believers. Look at verse 2. Look at verse 2. "I sent Timotheus, our brother, minister of God, and our fellow laborer in the gospel of Christ, to establish you and to comfort you concerning your faith." Paul said, this is important to me. And it's important enough that I'm not going to let hindrances stop me, and I will make whatever adjustments I have to make. There are some believers, because of that, there are some believers in Thessalonica that are going to see Timothy coming, and they're going to be encouraged, and they're going to be comforted by that. Paul is mindful of what somebody else needs, and the adjustments were not for his convenience. The adjustments is for somebody else's benefits. You can be an encouragement or you can be a discouragement just by the way that you live. And there is nothing that will strengthen you more than when you see Satan hinder you or hinder somebody else, and they just keep going. Just keep going. The priority of ministry. But then not only the priority of ministry, the second thing I want you to know is that problems are mandatory. Look at verse 3. "That no man should be moved by these afflictions. For yourselves know that we are appointed thereunto. For verily, when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation, even as it came to pass, and ye know." The persecution that Paul and his companions had not stopped when they left town. Evidently, those unbelieving Jews had turned their attention toward that young church, and they were putting pressure on those young believers. And Paul and Silas, they were hardened against persecution. They're used to it. We had this on the first missionary journey. I mean, bring it on. But these young believers, they are hardly established. They're not used to this. And to face this just weeks after getting saved. And so when Paul talks about afflictions, he's talking about their afflictions. And notice he's given them prior awareness. Look at verse 4. "For verily, when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation." I told you in advance. I told you that when I was there, I told you, get ready and be prepared. Peter said, "Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you as though some strange thing happened unto you." Jesus, 2 Timothy 3 and verse 12, Paul said, "Yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution." I just got to tell you, it comes with the territory. It is par for the course. Don't ask for an exemption. It is not coming. Don't expect it to get easier to live for Jesus in this dark and troublesome world. It's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder. He says in verse 3, "For yourselves know that we are appointed thereunto." Can I help you? You have an appointment with trouble. You just don't know the date. I have appointments on my calendar, and I know the date. But God's telling you that on His calendar, He has appointment for you. Just know it's, just be ready any day, because it is coming. Well, Aaron Maynard, I can say this. He won't mind if I say this, I'm sure. And if he does, he's not in here anyway. Aaron moved over here in December 2019, last year. And two thoughts in mind. One, he wanted to come to this church. He went to police academy. In fact, he liked it so much he went to it twice. And went to police academy and passed. And wants to go to work at Santa Rosa Sheriff's Department. And this week, they turned his application down. And it's just, if he can tell you the story, he don't mind. It is the silliest, dumbest, isn't that right, Brother Buddy? It's the silliest thing I've ever seen in my life. I have my own opinions about it, but they turned it down. And he called me and we talked about it. And I'm telling you, when it happened, it was just out of the blue. It was like a punch in the gut is what it was. And it surprised everybody except God. I can tell you, that appointment was already set. He just didn't have it on his calendar. And God's going to work the thing. God's going to work it all out. God is. He didn't have that on his calendar, but you are appointed unto trouble. So Paul says, I gave you prior awareness. And then Paul said, I was proven accurate. Look at verse 4. Even as it came to pass, and ye know, it happened just like I said that it would. I don't think anybody could have told us what this year would bring. Man, we started out 2020. We started out with a bang, didn't we? I mean, we were going to win the world this year, and then March came. And I mean, everything came crashing in. And I keep saying, I can't wait till 2020 is over. But it's going to bleed over into 2021. Maybe not the corona, but it'll be something else. This is not your last test. You will have more opportunity in 2021 to quit church and to back off. You'll have more excuses to quit. There will be more churches close their door in 2021. There'll be more missionaries come off the field in 2021. There will be more believers crack under pressure and quit in 2021. Prior awareness proven accurate. And then he said, the reason why I gave you that prior warning is it should prevent alarm. Look at verse 3. That no man should be moved by these afflictions. When you have a proper perspective about the Christian life, when you have your priorities in order, when you know that Satan is going to try to hinder you, but when you are willing to make whatever adjustments I need to make to just keep serving God, when trials and tribulations come, I'll tell you what it'll help you do. It'll help you from not falling apart. That no man should be moved by these afflictions. Don't move away. Don't faint in distress. Don't move out of service. Steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. You don't have to jump off a bridge when things get crazy. You don't have to get on psychotic drugs when your mind... No. You don't have to have a nervous breakdown. You can take the pressure and you can pray for God to just give you some more grace and just stand fast in the Lord. Paul says priority of ministry and problems are mandatory. Here's my third thing, and I'm going to go eat. In verse 5. When you have ministry in the right priority, you've got the proper mindset. When you know that problems are mandatory and I'm ready for it, what it does is it gives you a protective mindset. Look at verse 5. For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain. I heard about a church not far from here. Took a slightly different approach than what we did when the whole virus thing started. We knew it was a serious thing. We've got to be very cautious and take care of yourself. And we weren't going to shut church down for 6 months, but sanitize everything in between services, mask out. Hand sanitizer, encourage you if you want to wear a mask, please do so. You do what you need to do. Elderly folks, please be careful. I heard of another church that kind of mocked the whole thing. Made you feel uncomfortable if you wanted to wear a mask or if you do things like that. And I think that's very foolish and foolhardy. Especially when I had preacher friends that got it and were very sick and serious thing. I don't think you ought to ever make light of a trial, even if it's a trial that you're not going through. I don't believe that's right. You and I are to be concerned with the trials that others face. But here's what Paul said. He said, all of the persecution, what all those unbelieving Jews are doing, he said, here's what I'm concerned about the most. It's your spiritual health. I'm not as worried about your physical safety in the face of persecution, but I'm wondering how are you doing spiritually. Look at it. He says, I sent to know your faith. I don't want anybody to get the virus. I really don't. But I really don't want anybody to get sick spiritually. I think a lot of believers use this thing as an excuse. They're not as strong as they were in the beginning. It'd be a great tragedy if you survived the virus, but Satan sneak you in and hurt you in a much bigger way. And for that reason, there's an urgent response. Look at it in verse 5. For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I had to know how you were doing. I couldn't wait. It was critical to me. I had to know. Urgent response because he understood the ramifications. Look at verse 5. Lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain. Paul put sweat and tears and toil and labor into that work. And you can read this letter, and you can tell it wasn't just physical labor. He poured his life and he poured his heart into these people. He had prayed for them, he had wept for them, he had spent up all night talking to them and counseling them and helping them. He had rejoiced when they had rejoiced, he had sorrowed when they had sorrowed. Here's what he said. I have too much invested in you now to just let you go. I can't just walk away. Every parent knows what it is to buy your kid a new bike, and 3 days later it's out in the rain rusting. He has nothing invested in it. Every father knows what it is to go look for your screwdriver and you can't find it, and it's stuck in a tree in the woods somewhere. Every kid knows, every parent knows what that is. He has nothing invested in it. Harp on him all you want to. He's not going to grow responsibility. He's a teenager. He can't. But when he starts buying them himself. See, it's real cool when you get your car to burn rubber going out until you buy your first set of tires yourself. You start buying your own tires, you stop all that foolishness. Because you realize you got something invested in it. And when you have something invested in it, it gives you a protective mindset. I have too much invested in our marriage to let anything between us. And I have too many prayers and too many hopes invested in my children to let the devil take them. I have too much invested in this church to let Satan snatch it away. There's too much invested in our friendship to let some petty squabble tear it apart.